Well, good morning again, Title I coordinators. Thanks for joining us today. I hope everybody's doing well. My name is Erin Suddeth, and I'm the branch manager for the Title I Part A Support and Improvement branch. Again, if you're joining us on Teams, please be sure to mute your mic. And I have a colleague with me today. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, I'm David Malonte, one of the assistant directors in the division.
All right, I will get our presentation up and we'll get started. Okay. It's thinking about it. All right. So as always, just a couple housekeeping logistics before we get started. Remember that you can submit any questions or comments about the presentation in chat if you're joining us via Teams, or you can send an email to erin.suddeth@education.ky.gov. And if you have a question or comment that we don't get to during the live broadcast, we'll be sure to follow up with you as soon as possible. And as always, this webinar will be recorded and posted on our Title I Documents and Resources webpage. To recap from last month's webinar, we just had a few reminders, and the main thing that we focused on was the newly released non-regulatory guidance from the U.S. Department of Education, and that was about within district allocations. So we kind of went through that guidance and looked at some of the highlights of it. Whoops. Okay, agenda for today, we have some more reminders, a note about school-wide flexibility, and then the main focus is going to be on the allowability and approvability of Title I Part A expenditures. So our reminders, we did mention this at the end of the March webinar. It's regarding your CARES funds, Project 613F and 613FP. So those, you need to be continuing to spend those funds on allowable purchases that align with your district's spending plan in GMAP. Let's see, those funds do need to be spent or encumbered by September 30th, 2022. And you can check your award notifications for additional information about that grant. And KDE will be sending some reminders in the coming months to districts that do have remaining funds in those project codes. And as many of you have already seen, the final allocations for fiscal year 2022, that's 310I, IM, those have been uploaded into GMAP for districts who have their original application approved. So be sure to go in and check the status of your application to see if you need to go in and make some revisions. Okay. All right, so ESSA Schoolwide Flexibility, this announcement was released in the April 4th Commissioner's Monday message. I also emailed it directly to all the coordinators, so you should have seen this before. So Section 1114A1B of the Every Student Succeeds Act offers flexibility for the operation of school-wide programs in schools that don't meet the poverty threshold required in Section 1114A1A, and that threshold is typically 40%. So you can get approval from the state educational agency, which is KDE. That approval is required if you want to operate a school-wide program in a school that's below 40% low income. And the district needs to apply for this flexibility on behalf of a school by sending the request to KDE. And if you look in either the Commissioner's Monday message or the email that I sent, all the specifics about what needs to be included in the request, where to send that waiver request, that's all in there. And districts that have been approved for this flexibility in the past do not need to request it again. You can just continue to operate a school-wide program in that school that you have already received approval for, as long as they remain eligible for services as outlined in ESSA section 1113. So we're going to move on to the main portion of the webinar, where we're talking about allowability, approvability, and some other things to keep in mind when you're spending your Title I Part A funds. So it's kind of hard to believe that we're already starting to make plans for the 22-23 school year. And since that's right on the horizon, we thought it would be useful to talk about allowability, because we know that you're all starting to work with your schools on their plans for next year. So the first thing we want to talk about, and we've talked about a lot of these things before, are allowability procedures. This is something that we check for, these written procedures, if your district is selected for monitoring. So the Code of Federal Regulations requires non-federal entities maintain written allowability procedures as part of fiscal management systems. These procedures are supposed to outline the steps that the district follows to ensure that purchases are reasonable, allocable, necessary, and documented. So some kind of guiding questions to think about including in your procedures. How do schools submit their purchase orders or purchase requests for their Title I funds? Who approves those proposed purchases? And what, if any, state and local rules need to be taken into consideration before those are approved? And there are additional guiding questions and information in our allowable costs checklist and procedures for Title I Part A funds. You can use that as a resource. You can incorporate that checklist into your written procedures. It's up to you. So the funding matrix, I'm pretty sure we're probably all familiar with that, but in case you're not, it is a very big spreadsheet that includes each munis object code in the first column, and then all of the other columns are the various federal programs, Title I, Title II, Title III. They all have their own column. And for each object code, someone from that particular program has gone through and provided information as to whether or not funds from that program can be spent in that particular code. Now, sometimes it's a simple yes or no. Other times there are some additional caveats. Oftentimes when a district wants to know if something is allowable, the first place that they're going to check is the funding matrix. So that matrix can be found on the federal grants webpage, and there are several different ones. Title I is in the non-competitive federal funding matrix. And again, as I said, it includes all the allowable munis codes and an explanation about their allowability for each particular program. And I did already say this, our contacts do review that each year and make updates to it. So we're going to look a little bit about some of the individual, set aside some individual object codes and talk about some things to keep in mind when you're starting to work on your plans. So first up is our homeless set aside, and this information comes from the National Center for Homeless Education's Serving Students Experiencing Homelessness under Title I Part A. And that document outlines the two principles which govern the usage of homeless set-aside funds. There's a link to this document at the end of the presentation. And these two principles are that the services must be reasonable and necessary to assist students experiencing homelessness to take advantage of educational opportunities. And the funds must be used only as a last resort when funds or services are not available from other public or private sources. So a couple of things to keep in mind. A lot of schools and districts work with their family resource youth service centers to support students experiencing homelessness. And partnering with existing organizations is a great idea. You do need to keep in mind that those frisky funds often support students who are not experiencing homelessness. So you just want to be sure that any funds spent from the homeless set aside where you're working with Frisky, that those funds are spent supporting only students experiencing homelessness. The next set aside is parent and family engagement. This is from ESSA 1116A3. Parents need to be given an opportunity to participate in determining how these funds will be spent. The focus of these funds is building capacity for involvement to support a partnership to improve student academic achievement. So that section of ESSA states that the funds must be used to carry out evidence-based activities and strategies consistent with parent and family engagement policy, including at least one of the following. There could be professional development, programs that reach parents and family members at home, in the community, as well as at the school, disseminating information on best practices focused on parent and family engagement, collaborating with community-based or other organizations or employers with a record of success in improving and increasing parent and family engagement, as well as other activities and strategies determined to be appropriate and consistent with the policy. One thing I do want to caution you about with your parent and family engagement funds is using those funds for social events like movie nights, dances, holiday parties, and other events that aren't connected to engaging parents and families in the academic success of students. Using Title I funds to pay for these types of events doesn't really meet the intent and purpose of the program. Another thing I'd like to caution against is buying and distributing supplies to parents without providing support in using those supplies. So just buying a bunch of materials and supplies on their own, that doesn't constitute an effective program. You need to incorporate that with an activity, help the parents learn how to use those resources at home with their children. It's also worth noting that communication under Title I Part A is intended to be two-way. So items such as agendas and take-home folders are not generally considered two-way communication. So next, we're going to review some of the specific categories and expenses and discuss a couple things to keep in mind regarding these purchases. Okay, first up is staffing, and first up is AmeriCorps, and I sent an attachment when I sent the webinar announcement out today. So this is a recent Dear Colleague letter from the U.S. Department of Education. It was came out April 1st, so very recent. The department confirmed that Title I Part A funds can be used as matching funds for the AmeriCorps program. And so if you didn't receive a copy of that, it's linked at the end of the presentation, or you can reach out to me and I will send you one. It's important to ensure that all staff paid with Title I Part A funds are maintaining accurate time and effort documentation in accordance with the district's written time and effort procedures. Administrative costs, this is really specifically talking about people like program directors and coordinators. So Title I Part A funds may be used to pay a salary for the portion of time spent working directly with and overseeing the program. Time spent on non-program related activities in schools operating school-wide programs should not be paid with Title I Part A funds. So let's see. So sometimes we encounter a district level coordinator, I'm sure many of you fall into this category, who wear other hats. Maybe they are the chief academic officer, director of pupil personnel, PD coordinator, all kinds of different roles. And sometimes there is a misconception that in a school operating a school-wide program, because it's a school-wide program, that everything at that school falls under the umbrella of Title I Part A. So just because you're providing support to a school that happens to be a Title I school doesn't mean that it's directly tied to the Title I Part A program. So kind of a thing to keep in mind and ask yourself is, would I still be here providing this specific support if this school was not Title I Part A? So for example, if the coordinator is also the finance officer, the time that they spend helping set up the munis for the general funds, that wouldn't be a supported task. Even though that school is a Title I school, you'd still be setting up that munis if it wasn't a Title I school. Another example would be if the Title I coordinator was also the SBDM coordinator and they were responsible for conducting the training for new SBDM members. That time spent training SBDM members is not spent working on the Title I program. And finally, we've talked about this a couple of times. Remember, do not use district set-aside funds to pay for time spent overseeing the program at your participating non-public schools. So the staff overseeing those services at the non-public schools should be doing so when you're paid from either the general funding source or a portion of the private school's allocation that's reserved for the cost of equitable administration. And like I said, we've discussed this in a couple webinars and newsletters during this school year. So the big thing to watch out for here is if you are a coordinator whose salary is paid 100% from Title I funds. If you are overseeing programs at the private school, we should see on that services to private school page in GMAP, there's a line for equitable services administration costs, and we should see some costs there representing that portion of your salary. Next is postage. Districts may reserve a reasonable amount of funds in the administrative costs set aside to purchase the postage necessary to mail the required information about the notification to participate to non-public schools. We really don't need to see these funds used to mail home something like progress reports. And we do see postage sometimes in parent and family engagement. I want to stress again that parent and family engagement funds should be focused on two-way communication. Some schools do budget a reasonable amount to help disseminate information regarding best practices. However, it wouldn't be appropriate to budget a large amount for this type of communication because it's not two-way. That's not going to be an effective program, but a reasonable amount is okay. Next one is food, which is always kind of a hot topic. So Title I Part A funds may be used to purchase light snacks for parent and family engagement events. I think everybody knows at this point, meals are not an allowable expense. So you want to be sure that you're reviewing the amount budgeted for snacks and ensure that it's reasonable. We don't recommend spending a school's entire parent and family engagement allocation on snacks. Now, some districts determine a percentage of the school's parent and family engagement funds that can be spent on food. That's not something we require, but as you know, the district, you can decide to do something like that. And it's always a good idea to encourage schools to consider other funding sources which could pay for meals to encourage attendance. That's something we hear a lot on monitoring and get emails about. The meals is how, we get people in the door. We can't buy the meals with Title I funds. So, for example, on a recent monitoring visit, a principal mentioned that they were having an upcoming Title I event and they were partnering with their PTO, and the PTO was using their funds to provide a chili dinner to help bring people in the door. So it was still a Title I event, but Title I didn't pay for that chili dinner. Next is furniture. So Title I Part A funds may be used to purchase furniture that's essential for carrying out the program. And I have a couple examples. So let's say that you are implementing a new program in your kindergarten classrooms, and that program requires a specific style of table be used to facilitate this group work. That would be allowable. Another one I heard recently from a district, they wanted to set up a parent resource center where parents can access some different resources as well as meet in small groups with each other. And they were going to purchase a couple small, like a small table and a couple of chairs for that. That would be allowable. It meets the intent of the program. What's not allowable would be upgrading all of your cafeteria tables or your desks or your chairs, either in an individual classroom or throughout the school. Awards and incentives, this can be kind of a tricky one. Title I Part A funds may be used to purchase low-cost rewards and educationally related incentives for students. When we're talking about reasonable awards, we're thinking about things like ribbons and certificates. We don't really want to see trophies and plaques and costlier items. Educationally related incentives could be pencils and bookmarks, that kind of thing. We don't want to see, sometimes we'll see like t-shirts or something. That would not be an appropriate use of funds. And these awards need to be purchased only for students, no awards for staff or parents. Oh, and I kind of listed all of these: trophies, plaques, t-shirts, bags, all of those types of things are not allowable purchases. I didn't put this on here, but like gift cards, that's not allowable. There we go. All right, instructional field trips. Title I Part A funds may be used to pay for portions of instructional field trips. This includes things like entrance fees, reasonable transportation expenses. It's really important that these instructional field trips relate to the instructional unit or the lesson plans. Field trips may not be used as awards or incentives. And some things that would not be allowable would be expenses for overnight trips, meals for students or staff on the field trips, and of course, non-instructional field trips, just, kind of the fun celebratory ones. That's not going to be allowable with Title I funds. Next is safeguarding assets. So some items may need to be tracked prior to purchasing. Districts need to determine how they're going to safeguard assets such as computing devices, iPads, Chromebooks, things like that, other pilferable items, the things that can very easily just walk off and be misplaced. If you're purchasing those things with Title I Part A funds, you need to make sure you're keeping track of them, make sure that they are used solely for authorized purposes. Some guiding questions in determining what needs to be safeguarded. Will the item last longer than 1 year? If this item was damaged, would we repair it or would we just throw it away? Is the item easily lost or stolen? And is the item considered valuable? And we do have a resource, Safeguarding Assets Purchased with Title I funds, that talks about some different things like inventory, tagging items, things you should consider tagging, and it's linked on this slide. It's also on our Documents and Resources webpage. Okay, do we have any questions? I'm going to pull up my email to see if we have any questions there.
I have one in the chat. Due to our relationships with Frisky and other community resources, it's nearly impossible to spend the homeless set aside. Can you share a list of ways this set aside is spent across the state?
Let me think. Just kind of off the top of my head, and if you are, you have a really great way of spending those funds, feel free to, raise your hand or put it in the chat or something. You could spend it on tutoring services for those students, counseling services. Sometimes there may be some trauma associated with something that they may have gone through and they need some counseling. Another important thing to think about is how much you're reserving for your homeless set aside. So you can take into account the other funding sources that you use when you're determining that set aside. Trying to think of any other examples. David, can you think of any?
Well, just like you were alluding to, holistic services, anything that, if a kid needs glasses or dental care, outside of academics, if they need materials and supplies to participate fully in the school experience, and that might include if a homeless kid wants to participate on a sports team but can't pay for XYZ shoes or pants or whatever it might be, those types of things are allowable as well. So I think looking holistically at what the needs are academically and non-academically, and thinking about what would help this kid participate in the school experience more fully is kind of the starting question for that set aside. And another thing, we do see some districts spending funds on transportation to school of origin. That kind of gives a starting place for that answer.
You could also do maybe a homeless liaison or some professional development for that liaison, or for just other district and school staff about the needs of homeless students, things like that. And I see that John Shelley has his hand raised, so I'm going to invite you to go ahead and unmute and share with us.
Just to add to what you said, Aaron and David, we place some in the welfare code, which might be any type of clothing to break down the barriers of that student functioning as a normal student could function in school. We've bought caps and graduation outfits before to remove the stigma barrier. We've done that. We've actually, I think, bought gas cards before for students that needed to take the ACT. And I think for a summer school session, a homeless student wanted to attend the summer school session. We didn't have transportation, so we provided some gas cards. But that's just some of the things that we've done in the past.
Yeah, all right. Thanks for sharing. Okay, and anybody else have any questions or things to share or anything? Not seeing any in my email.
I see another hand up here. Maybe it was John's. Yeah, I think it was just John's, maybe. Okay.
All right. Okay, our upcoming webinar dates for you. Our next webinar is going to be Thursday, May 26th, as always, from 10 to 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And as a reminder, we do value your feedback, and we always want to learn what's helpful, what you'd like to see more of in these webinars. So any comments, ideas, questions, you can submit those through our anonymous webinar feedback survey. And that survey link is always going to be in every month of our Title I newsletter. And we do have a resources page, some of the documents that I mentioned during the presentation today, so you can access those on the PowerPoint. All right, I will stop sharing here. And if there's no further questions or comments or anything, I will let everybody get back to their day. And thank you all for joining us today.